so if you could please take a seat in the front of the room. The Sea Ranch Forum Steering Committee is an independent group. It's not an arm of the TSRA. Our goal is to present forums that are relevant to life on the Sea Ranch. In many cases, our interests do run parallel with the communication interests of TSRA committees, and we cooperate with those groups in presenting forums. However, our greatest value to the Sea Ranch is in presenting information outside the formalities of the TSRA. Today, and I've got to do, the exits are here, and the restrooms are across the way. We will hear from our presenter, Mr. Rick Hanks, who is the manager of the California Coastal National Monument. This includes the entire coast of California, and especially today we're going to be finding out about the 12 or so miles that make up our Sea Ranch coast. I'm just going to let Mr. Hanks tell you about himself and about what he's going to tell us.
Good afternoon. I'm glad to see a group of people out here that are not at the Arsenic and Old Lakes. So. I was competing with that. So. I looked on the schedule and saw that it's tomorrow and it's next weekend, and so I didn't think that was that bad. So glad to see you all here. I'm Rick Hanks. I manage the California Coastal National Monument. I work for the U.S. Department of the Interior, Bureau of Land Management, which I'll talk about here in a second. And I have been running up and down the coast in this job now for getting close to 4 years. It'll be 4 years coming this winter. Dealing with a monument that I'll talk about here that's been around for a little over 5.5 years. And one of the reasons that I think it's appropriate for being here today is last week, just got the approval of our plan. Our plan we've been working on for 3 years has been approved. And one of the opportunities we have is to begin talking to various communities about the role that they can play with the long-term management of the California Coastal National Monument. What I'm going to do is go through a PowerPoint presentation, these parts of it, it's my notes, and talk about the development of the management approach we have for the California Coastal National Monument. And I'll be touching on things like rocks, ecosystems, partnerships, and gateways. And what I like about this opportunity is normally I have about 15 minutes to give this presentation. Like I've got, if I want, an hour to do it, and an hour to talk about it. So, but it depends on how long you want to be here. We have 2 hours, and I'll be here as long as anybody wants me to be here. But I'm going to go through this and see how long it takes. It shouldn't be an hour, but when I have a license to talk about any of these things, if I'm talking too much, let me know. I enjoy talking about the California Coastal National Monument. I've worked for the Bureau of Land Management for over 32 years. And I've worked in management for at least half that time. And I've been what I call my downward mobility program. I worked my way down to this position. And I get a chance to deal with the entire coast of California, which is fun. And I, as a manager, for example, in New Mexico, I manage everything from open pit coal mines to wilderness areas, full breadth of things. This is fun because it's on the preservation side. So I'm going to be talking to you about what is the Bureau of Land Management's most unique national monument. When we talk about national monuments, most people think of what? The National Park Service. The Bureau of Land Management is relatively new in the national monument game, or old. Bureau of Land Management is the remnant of the old General Land Office, the oldest federal land management agency, been around since 1812, and goes back to a land ordinance of 1758. So we actually go back roots that far. But 1886, excuse me, 1786. The Bureau of Land Management is the largest land management agency in the federal government. We manage all the lands that are not national parks, national forest, military, or others, but 260-some million acres is a fairly big chunk. The California Coastal National Monument is a small piece of that, but it's been in federal ownership and under the administration of the Bureau of Land Management, the lands anyway, or the General Land Office, since California was a territory. So this is not new, the designation that's new is National Monument designation, which elevates it to a much higher level and an opportunity to do some things that we really couldn't do before. I guess we could have, but we wouldn't have had the attention, we wouldn't have had the funding, although funding is right now is a limit we have anyway. I should add that the Bureau of Land Management also makes it interesting is we manage the federal mineral estate, the upland mineral estate, not the offshore, the upland mineral estate, whether it's under military property or national forest property or others, but we deal with a lot of things, making the Bureau of Land Management really the true multiple use agency. We deal with all kinds of things that you can do in land. But in reality, today, the Bureau of Land Management is the wild land manager of the federal government. Being the largest land management agency, there are 3 other large agencies that together are referred to as the Big Four, manage over 95% of the federal lands. That's, to show you, the BLM, 260-some million acres. The next largest land management agency is the National Forest Service with 190 million acres. And the National Wildlife, or the National Fish and Wildlife Service manages 95 million, and then the National Park Service with 85 million. Collectively, those 4 agencies manage over 95% of the federal lands. But they all have systems, the National Park System, the National Forest System, the National Wildlife Refuge System. And up until June of 2000, so just a little over 5 years ago, the BLM didn't have a system for its special places. It's now part of the National Landscape Conservation System, which the California Coastal National Monument is one of those. That works under the whole concept that the truly conserved places of unique natural and cultural value, that you really must protect the landscapes that they're part of. California Coastal National Monument, I get to, is a part of a big landscape or a seascape. It's important to a whole bunch of us. It's the California coast. But the National Landscape Conservation System includes about 15% of BLM's land. It includes all of those federally designated, all those designations that Congress gave us. National conservation areas, that was the BLM's version of a national monument until fairly recently. Well, I should add that the General Land Office were the very first ones to manage national monuments. They came out of an act, the Antiquity Act, that Congress passed in 1906 that gave the President the authority to create national monuments. The very first ones that were created off public land managed by the General Land Office, BLM's predecessor. So BLM was the first managers of national monuments before Congress created the National Park Service 10 years later in 1916. So we're kind of coming complete circles now that we're back managing some monuments anyway. Our versions of that for a while were national conservation areas. Those that have been north of here. And the King Range National Conservation Area is the BLM's very first national conservation area in 1970, created by Congress. And there's a series of other things in California that we do have. And this is, I'll share some with you that I shared with BLM folks, but that's, I would normally not do all this, but I'll just use this as an example of what we have in California. Out of a system that has 15 national conservation areas, 3 of them are in California, or at least managed by the BLM in California, the Bureau of Land Management. And that's the King Range, it's the California Desert Conservation Area, and a portion of one that's in Nevada. BLM actually manages, you look at the map over here and you notice in yellow that goes over there. The Bureau of Land Management in California manages that portion of Nevada. And in that portion is the Black Rock Desert, High Rock Canyon, Immigrant Trails National Conservation Area. That's a mouthful. It's the High Rock portion of it that the Bureau of Land Management administers. And I might say that as a district manager in that part of the world, I had something to do with getting that created. So that's kind of nice to be done. The 15 national monuments that the BLM administers, we have one that was created by Congress, and that's in California. And we have 2 other ones. We have the Carrizo Plains down in San Luis Obispo, Kern County, and the California Coastal National Monument, which I'll talk about here this afternoon. But we also have portions of wilderness areas. The Bureau of Land Management has over 148 wilderness areas, and over half of those are in California. We have over 600 wilderness study areas, and we've got at least 80 of those still yet to be designated. They're also in California. We have 9 National Historic Trails, 3 portions of them in California. We have 2 scenic trails, including the Pacific Crest Trail, the biggest portion of it's in California, managed by BLM. And we have over 38 wild and scenic rivers, of which 6 of those are also in California. So that's what the National Landscape Conservation System is. In California, Bureau of Land Management has a fair chunk of it. But this is what I want to talk about this afternoon, the California Coastal National Monument. As I said, it's really BLM's most unique one. It was established on January 11th of 2000. I wasn't hired until late November of 2002, and actually got in the job full-time in February of 2003. So we were moving, but not necessarily quickly, but we were moving on getting something done here. But what I'd like when I was done with it, by presidential proclamation, I want you to read this. When we had our public meetings, I don't remember, Julie, we had people kept asking, how big is, what's in the proclamation? So I stuck this into our public meetings. I said, there's the proclamation. I want to show that it wasn't, it's only 2 pages. A lot of flowery words. In the middle of it, it says that it's set up to protect all unappropriated, unreserved federal lands or interest in federal lands in the form of islands, rocks, exposed reefs, and pinnacles where above mean high tide. It's above mean high tide portion of those. Within 12 nautical miles of the shoreline of the state of California. If you look at the map that's on the wall, that light blue, or you look at this one, the light blue, 12 nautical miles off the shoreline of the coast of California is that 14,600 square nautical mile area. That is not the monument. This light blue is not the monument. It's the rocks inside of that, on the small islands, the portion above mean high tide. That is what we refer to as the California Coastal National Monument Corridor. The reason that's important to show that if we do acquire some of the rocks that are not part of it, for those that are familiar with the Point Arena area and the Stonetta Ranch, with the Stonetta Ranch we acquired a 5+ acre sea lion rock, and that was our first addition to the California Coastal National Monument. By acquiring that property with that island became automatically part of the California Coastal National Monument, consistent with the proclamation. So what is the monument, and what is it protecting? It's rocks, basically. Small islands. The largest one that we're dealing with is a little over 10 acres. Fish Rock is one of those that's over 10 acres up north of here. But we also have some very small ones, the size of this podium. We have thousands of those. So what are we dealing with? We're dealing with more than 20,000 rocks spread from the north part of Point Loma in San Diego County all the way up to the Oregon border. So we've got a string of, or a network of rocks, 20,000 of them, offshore, that run from San Diego to Del Norte County, that are various sizes and shapes and habitats, both for plants and animals. So we have a wide variety that we're dealing with. We, again, a reminder, we're dealing with a portion above mean high tide. If you look at that upper line there, the light blue, that's the mean high tide line. And again, from mean high tide line onshore out 12 nautical miles. If you're dealing with below that, below mean high tide, out 3 nautical miles, you're dealing with the State Land Commission. If you're dealing from 3 nautical miles to 12 nautical miles out, you're dealing with the Bureau of Land Management sister agency and the Mineral Management Services. So you're dealing with jurisdictions that are varied. But that's not always the case. There are some municipalities, the city of San Diego, the city of Pacific Grove, for example, all have, by state legislation, some of the State Land Commission authority. San Diego has a nautical mile off of the coast of San Diego is under the city of San Diego's jurisdiction. Off of Pacific Grove, up off the Monterey Peninsula, it's out to 60 feet in depth, below mean high tide. Everything above that is still in federal ownership, and therefore is in the California Coastal National Monument. Now, if you think that's complicated, we look at the wording of the proclamation itself, and it's not really clear, if you start looking at it, about what is it we're protecting. It talks about overwhelming beauty and magnificent scenery, so it talks about the scenic quality. It talks about geologic formation, seabirds. It talks about marine mammals and vegetation, and nearshore ocean zones and tide pools, and and species of scientific interest. But if you really start looking at what does it deal with, it's what are we protecting? Geologic formations, again, the portion above mean high tide, and the habitat that they provide for animals and plants. So that is actually fairly simple. That's really what we deal with. We manage the uplands too, the BLM. Land, public lands we manage the lands and the habitat that provide for animals and plants. But the proclamation also recognizes that these rocks have irreplaceable scientific values. They're important in protecting California's fragile ecosystems. That connects us with things larger than just the rocks and the portion above mean high tide, which again is our jurisdiction and our responsibility to recognize that they're part of something bigger. In a quick summary of what it is we're managing, it's more than 20,000 rocks spread along the whole 1,100 miles of the California coast, from mean high tide out 12 nautical miles, in an area, that's that area of over 14,000 square nautical miles. That's not the monument, that's where the monument is encompassed. The grand total of our 20,000 rocks is about 1,000 acres. So I'm dealing with 1,000 acres spread from San Diego to Del Norte County. All of them offshore. And they cross, of the 15 field offices that BLM has in California, 5 of them have some jurisdictions along the coast. So there's 5 BLM field offices. The closest one for this area is in Ukiah. They're the ones that deal with the Stonetta Ranch property up north as well. But it's also adjoined and intertwined with dozens of different jurisdictions and adjoining different jurisdictions, whether they are state parks, national park units, national wildlife refuges, in one case, national forest, private ownership, the Sea Ranch Association, properties, all kinds of 15 counties, dozens and dozens of different municipalities that we're dealing with, and a lot of other jurisdictions, whether you're dealing with Coast Guard or dealing with California Department of Fish and Game, a variety of things. So how do you plan for this? And that's what we're doing for the past 3 years. And again, the nice thing about being here, this group, and you're the first group I've talked to since we've completed the plan. Since the plan has been decided, it hasn't been BLM people. I did talk to a group of BLM folks in Sacramento, but you're the first public group we've talked to since the plan's been completed. The plan is off to the printers, and we'll get it back probably 2 weeks from Monday is what I was told yesterday. Probably get it sooner, but we'll have it available at the end of this month. So what I should do is, if anybody's interested in a copy of that plan, if they can leave me their name and mailing address, we'll mail you a copy of that. Either a hard copy or a disc if you want it on CD. But let me talk about what's in that. Again, we're talking about the monument, the plan, the corridor. We've also include onshore stuff. We tied into the California Coastal Commission's coastal zone. That and the corridor are the area that we did the planning on. But the planning was for the rocks. Plans, like our typical land use plans, talk about the physical resources that we're protecting, the biological resources, and the cultural priorities that we're dealing with. So we're dealing with geologic and paleontological, even remnant soils that some fairly interesting because they're isolated soils that may have had different erosive activities on the uplands. So some of those are interesting. We have some unique wildlife habitat and even some endemic vegetation out on some of these rocks, as well as they're linked to visual, scenic qualities, and even some of these even have archaeological, prehistoric and historic sites associated with them. We always address recreation in our plans. With this one, we're really not encouraging access to the rocks, but we are also at the same time not disallowing it. We're starting with a monitoring process that will deal with educating folks why you shouldn't be out there and what you're affecting, and monitoring areas. And if areas that are in need of protection are being affected, we're looking at seasonal closures and limitations. And if we have some real problems, we're talking about long-term regulations that may close them off. But right now, we're not doing any of that until we get to it. This photo, by the way, is one of the few places you can't see it very well, where actually people can walk. Most of these are do a pretty good job protecting themselves. They're difficult to get out on. I've seen this particular rock happen to be off of Point Pinos in Monterey Peninsula. I've watched fishermen being caught out there and have local lifeguards having to go out and rescue them because they went out and didn't realize what the tide was doing, and it was over their heads in rough waters getting back. So we don't really encourage people to be on there. We also deal with a whole series of, since we're the Bureau of Land Management, land authorizations, but in this case, almost all of them are not allowed out there. All the rocks in the monument have been withdrawn from lands and minerals activities. So you can't go out and use the rocks for riprap. You can't go out and put a cell phone transmitter up there. However, if the need for emergency uses or aids navigation, tying to the Coast Guard, we are authorizing some of those. We're doing that on a case-by-case basis where appropriate and with appropriate restrictive measures, but we don't have a lot of that. We also, in our land use planning, identify lands that we're going to get rid of or lands we're going to acquire. Well, we're not getting rid of anything, but we are recognizing that there are a number of rocks that are under other jurisdictions that aren't really being dealt with right now that we may look at acquiring where we can add to the resource protection. And that's what we did with Strenetta property. We had an opportunity to acquire that. There are a number of rocks that are withdrawn by executive order for lighthouse or aid navigation purposes. Some done north of Crescent City. There's some that were drawn there in the 1850s. And they put a lighthouse out in one of them. There's a whole bunch of them that they'll never put anything on. And I don't think the Coast Guard even realizes they have the administrative responsibility of those. But we'd eventually like to have that appealed, and then they'll become part of the monument. All the way down south in Orange County, I found that all their rocks were drawn by Congress in 1931, temporarily, until they could find some way of protecting them. And they've forgotten about that. So we need to get that appealed so they can become part of the monument. So things like that we're looking at in our land ownership and land administrative adjustment. But what we're really spending a lot of our time on, at least we provide a framework to do this, for fairly active education and interpretive opportunities. But what we're really looking at is how we can leverage partnerships with existing programs. How can we tie in with things that are already happening along the coast? There's a lot happening in the coast of California. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, but we've got an opportunity here really to tie into that and leverage some of the partnerships. Putting our priority then for interpretation on existing mainland facilities. And I'll talk a little bit later here how we're going to be doing that. We're tying to things that already exist. We're looking at the importance of research for both gathering information about what it is we're protecting, but also being aware that we're balancing research actions with the need to protect resources, so that we're not allowing research out there that's going to disturb or impact the resource. So that's an interesting balancing act that we will be dealing with in the future. So what did we establish in the plan as the basic management framework for the monument? And I'm going to do this in the form of a graphic. Just because folks have worked with me for years know I like playing in circles. But if we're looking at least the part that the BLM has responsibility for, 20,000 rocks and small islands, a portion above mean high tide, it's very, very clear that our management aspect of that is preservation. It's to protect those rocks. That becomes our management focus then, is the protection of those rocks. And it's difficult to protect them if we don't know what it is we have, so we're putting attention on research that will give us a better understanding of the values that are associated with the California Coastal National Monument. A way of getting that information out through education, outreach, interpretation, and not only with the plan that we've done, a general framework plan, but it identifies a whole series of other more specific plans. A interpretive plan, for example, that we need to do, or a research plan where you get more specific, more detailed. It's what we refer to as an activity plan that is part of our implementation. But also the fact that we are linking with a whole series of plans. We have 15 county general management plans that we need to link with. We have a half a dozen plans that are for our sister agency, the National Park Service, that we need to link with consistency. There are over 45 state park units that are associated with the monument that have general plans that we need to link with. So all of that aspect is a key to what we're doing. But that is what where BLM's responsibility is. We realize that they're part of something larger, a larger landscape, where we have our ecosystem focus, what I sort of refer to here as a part of a larger seascape, of which the rocks are connected. And so the rocks, we just can't manage them by themselves. So that connects us with the various ecosystems that are associated with the monument, therefore with the various jurisdictions that have the responsibility over those portions, and therefore with the third element, the third aspect that we need to deal with, and that's partnerships. We've realized we can't manage these rocks by themselves when we have, I mentioned some of the jurisdictions that we have. So we have to look at who are the key entities that we need to deal with. We already had an existing agreement with the California Department of Fish and Game, and we've extended that. We created 3 partnership categories. And I want to spend a few minutes here talking about those categories. One were our core managing partners. The second one was our collaborative partners. And third, our stewards. And I'm talking about steward partnerships as opposed to individual stewardships. I could probably have a number of you work with me in those instances in being stewards for it. But I'm looking at a partnership with an entity that would become a partnership agreement with an organization. Let me go back to our core managing partners. Looked around and looked to see who we're really involved with. Of course, if we're under us, we've got the State Land Commission for the first 3 nautical miles. You've got the Mineral Management Services from 3 nautical miles out, 12 nautical miles. But I looked at them, most of them are really not land management agencies. They deal with permitting, they deal with concerned jurisdictions. But we need ones that had some regulations and had some ability to do some things. Well, we continued the relationship we had with the California Department of Fish and Game. We had agreements with them, too, actually, since late 1970s, dealing with the offshore rocks. And we realized that the folks that have the infrastructure for interpreting these is the state park system. I mentioned 45. There are over 60 state park units along the coast of California. At least 45 of those have rocks that are part of the California Coastal National Monument immediately offshore. If you go down south, the whole Sonoma Coast State Beach, all of those rocks, every one of the rocks off of that state park unit are part of the California Coastal National Monument. If you go up to Elk, Greenwood State Beach, all of those rocks in Greenwood Cove, and Elk Cove, and Cuffy Cove, all of those are all part of the California Coastal National Monument. And by the way, that's what the poster is in the back, I just realized. The poster in the back is looking right down where Highway 1 turns north of Elk. It looks right across Cuffy Cove and right down across, looking at it from here, I can see it looks right across Elk and Greenwood Cove way in the back. But all of those rocks are all part of the California Coastal National Monument, but they're off of the state park unit, which gives us an opportunity for interpretation. Simple things like you deal with Sonoma Sonoma Coast State Beach. It already has infrastructure there. It already has pull-outs that look right on the rocks. It has Duncan Landing, Duncan Point, with a loop that goes out there, and you can pull in and park and look straight down to the south and look right across all the rocks in the monument. Or you can go up to the northern portion and look up and see some different formations running up north. The existing structure is already there. Up on the overview above Goat Rock is State Park. But all those offshore, Arch Rock, Half Mile Rock, Mile Rock, all of those are part of the California Coastal National Monument, and the infrastructure is there for interpretation. So we partnered with state parks to work with us on the interpretive and protective part. What I'm looking at is no more core management. These really are the core management partners. The plan has our state director approving the plan, and has the director of California Department of Fish and Game and the director of state parks signing as core managing partners. So on the signature page, is one thing that I think is an accomplishment, getting our state director and the director of our 2 core managing partners to sign on one page in the document. So when you open up the document, those signatures are there, which is good. Good way to start. But the one where I'm expecting to have the most variety of potential partners is a category we're just calling our collaborative partners. Right now, and I was waiting until our plan was done to push to start getting some of these partners, both the collaborative partners and the third category I'm talking about. And with the plan being done, I can start doing that. But right now, we have 4 collaborative partners, 2 federal agencies, federal organizations, and 2 private nonprofit groups. I'm physically housed, I work out of Monterey. And I work out of the National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration, NOAA's, Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary Office. The Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary provides me office space. My rent is provided a copy machine for their science section. So I maintain a copy machine, and that's my rent in the high rent district area. And so we've got space for a couple of us that work, a couple of BLM folks working out of that office with NOAA. But an example of how we use the position, how we use our partnership. Not only are they providing the office space, they have money and a little bit of positions. We have positions and a little bit of money. I have 2 of my positions that are detailed full-time in the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. They pay 100% of their salary. I get 15% of their time. It also allows me to use some other staffers. We also have a partnership with NOAA's National Marine Protection Area Center. Their Science Institute is in Monterey. And they're looking at the federal side of marine protected areas. And they had a position that they were losing. So I provided them a position, and for the last 2 years, they've been funding a position full-time that I've had half the time. They funded for 2 years 100% of their salary, and I got 50% of that person's work. That person serves as my research and grants coordinator. Eventually, I will end up paying half of the salary, but that's sort of the way I'm working. I've got some similar things going on with our 5 field offices, with shared resources. The person that handles public affairs for me actually works out of Susanville, up in the northeastern part of the state, because he handles this part of, he handles Northern California. But the person that handles my website is out of Ukiah. The person that deals with some things I'm dealing with as I'll talk about with some gateway communities, is working out of our California Desert District, is doing stuff for me down south. I have a botanist out of our office in Hollister, a geologist out of our office, and a marine geologist out of our office in Arcata, and so on. I've got about 30 people I refer to as my adjunct staff, but they're doing that. Most of the work they're doing for me is on top of 100% of their time being allocated. But that'll be changing now that we have a plan. But they are doing things for me, and their offices now will have the responsibility of implementing their portion of the plan. And that means also developing some local collaborative partners. Our nonprofit ones happen to be groups like from the very beginning we tied in with Point Reyes Bird Observatory. That's where people know them. They changed their name to PRBO Conservation Science. They are the premier sort of bird researching group along the California coast. And they're working with us on looking at seabird conservation monitoring protocols, and where we can help fill the gaps, and how we can collectively go in for some grants to begin filling in some of the grants and some of the gaps in seabird monitoring along the California coast. During our public scoping meetings, we had a lot of interest from the recreational fishing community who looked at the blue line in here for the corridor, said, you're going to be creating a whole new sanctuary, and be closing off the entire coast to recreational fishing. Well, it got their interest up, but they also did one thing that I had a difficult time doing. They got the word out to a whole bunch of people. There was such thing as the California Coastal National Monument. And I was so impressed with that I talked to them about being partners with us. They have as part of their mission statement that they're interested in sustainable ocean resources. And said, if you're interested in that, how would you like to be a long-term partner with us? And how would you like to be our liaison with the recreational fishing community? And make sure that things we do are not being misinterpreted by the recreational community. And they also have offered, we haven't put this into effect yet, but we do have it in an agreement with them, to even serve as our eyes and ears in some cases on the water. They're out there in the water where they can actually provide us some information about some things that we may not otherwise have ourselves. But they formally signed an agreement with us. They are now a collaborative partner with us for the California Coastal National Monument. And they've got the ability to get word out to 65,000 people, which I think is a pretty good deal, and hopefully a more correct word than what they were getting out when we were first dealing with them. But they did help get some attention. We have future opportunities from everything from the Coast Guard to things like the Vega Bay Marine Laboratory, UC Davis, or from things like the aquarium and the Pacific to the Ocean Conservancy. So we're looking at a variety of them, and a number of these groups I've talked to about doing agreements, and when we had a plan finished, I would be approaching them. And that's what I'm going to be doing over the next year. We'll be talking to these folks about formalizing our collaborative partnership. But our third one, I think, is more unique and innovative. One is what we're calling our stewards, or stewardship partnerships. And here we're looking for entities that own property onshore of the and joining the California Coastal National Monument rocks, or portions of them. They have an interest in working with us and have a capability in one form or another to help us to monitor that portion of the monument. I originally put the idea together with contact that we had in some public meetings down south. Actually, it was Laguna Beach, but if you remember what I just said about Orange County, Laguna Beach is in Orange County, we suddenly found out during that process that those rocks down there had been withdrawn. They're still managed by BLM, but they're not part of the monument until we get that Congress withdrawal off. But they wanted to be our first municipality to be a steward. Well, I can't deal with them until I get, so actually I'm working with them now quietly and getting Congress to remove that withdrawal. When they revoke that, then we can deal with it. But in talking to folks about that in our initial public meetings, the one that expressed some interest in doing that was the Air Force, and they were interested in doing it related to Vandenberg Air Force Base. 35-mile stretch from Point Conception, where they were concerned that another entity was being created. They already have to deal with the Park Service, with the Channel Islands National Park. They have to deal with NOAA, with the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary. And they're concerned, oh no, we now got to deal with the BLM or the California Coastal National Monument. What I said to them is, how would you like to be the California Coastal National Monument for that portion? And work within the framework and work with us on the monitoring of that portion of the coast. They began thinking about it, and they took me out with their environmental folks. And what I realized is that they had already been dealing with plans to deal with harbor seals. They were out on the rocks. They were already dealing with seabird monitoring. And who had they contracted with? PRBO, Conservation Science. They'd already been working with some of our partners. They had some interest in trying to get some things worked out with the California Department of Fish and Game that we could provide with the monument. So they got very interested in becoming our first steward, and they are. Through an agreement they've signed, they are the first steward with us. And last week we just had our second steward, was the Trinidad Rancheria, a federally recognized tribe off of the community of Trinidad. They've got a small section there, but they have a portion of the coast off some fairly significant rocks. Plus they also manage the mooring buoys in Trinidad Harbor all around a series of rocks that are part of the monument. And in fact, their office of their environmental protection coordinator looks right out on one rock. I was sitting there talking to him about it. I look out there and there's a boat going around one of these rocks. And I said, that's what you can do for me. You can watch and you can tell me when that's happening. And they also have a boat and they're willing to go out and check some things out for us. Plus, they also have an education program with some of their students dealing with getting them familiar with marine resources, and they wanted to link that with us. So they were looking at being a steward. As a result, I've been looking at other entities, the Navy for a couple of the rocks, areas where we have rocks around San Clemente and San Nicolas Island down in the southern Channel Islands. I've been dealing with some other islands down there that I would like the Channel Island National Marine Sanctuary to be our steward. Been talking about with the county of San Mateo off of Fitzgerald Marine Reserve. They have a very active program of being a steward for that portion. Eventually we'll be dealing with cities like the city of Pacific Grove and the city of Pismo Beach and the northern part of a series of rocks. But we're also looking at entities like Pebble Beach Company. But one of the reasons I'm interested in being here is there's an opportunity of doing that with the Sea Ranch Association and taking this stretch of the California coast and developing a partnership agreement with the association and possibly using committees as you do with a variety of things. You've got an environmental group, you've got monitoring harbor seals, tying that in with what we may be just monitoring what may be happening with some of the rocks off of this portion of the coast. I had the opportunity to meet with John Fox this morning, sort of run that by him, bounce that off of him, and he and I talking about, I had showed him a rough draft of what our format of what our MOUs look like, and I'll be sending that electronically to John. Will play around with that a little bit, and then he present it to the board. I wanted to get some feedback tonight too about that, so we had a question and answer period. Get your thoughts on that and answer some questions that you may have. But this is an interesting opportunity to actually be the local, to some degree, I'll put this really in quotes, the local manager of the California Coastal National Monument. It would be your portion of the California Coastal National Monument, right here off of Sea Ranch. So we have a responsibility with protecting and preserving the 20,000 rocks. We realize they're part of a larger landscape. There are things you're doing in part of the larger landscape. We take our little piece and add it to that. And we do that through partnerships. But I make it happen by bringing it down to the community level, the community focus. And this is where we get into some things I'll also talk about related to our community gateways, with bringing down local stewards and local involvement. So how do we, out of all the things we could be doing with the California Coastal National Monument, what are our priorities? There's 6 basic ones that I want to touch on here really quickly. One of them, obviously, when push comes to shove, we have the responsibility of protecting those rocks, geologic formation and habitat that provide for animals and plants, the habitat for biota. So protecting the resource and the values is our number one thing. To really do that, we need to develop and maintain partnerships. 3 partnership categories. We'll be working on that. I've got a lot of work I still need to do with Cal Fish and Game State Parks, with 2 core partners. That'll keep me occupied for a while. But we've got some opportunities with collaborative partners and stewards as well. The thing that we found in doing our plan is we know a lot about what's happening on the waters around the rocks and what's going on onshore, but we really don't have a lot of good information on what's actually happening on those rocks. And they're very unique. I mean, I took some of our biologists out to some, just in a half hour's time, and pointed out some things that are just, I mean, it's really interesting when you start looking at something at that small scale, really what you actually have. You've got some fairly unique resources associated with 20,000 rocks. Some maybe not so unique, but other ones are very unique. You've got some endemic plants, you've got some interesting habitats, you've got some very critical seabird nesting areas, you've got very important seal and sea lion resting areas, as well as seabird roosting. And you have a whole series of intertidal species that we have the very upper portion of the intertidal that have to be addressed. So what we're looking at is doing a more intensive inventory, what we're calling a site characterization study, and we're looking at trying to get some funding to do that, so we have that base to get a little more specifics on what it is we are protecting and their values. But, so what's new that's the basic things we've been doing, but with this plan, one of the newer things is to get a sense of place. You go to the monument that runs along the whole 1,100 miles of the California coast, to get a sense of place. What we're looking at is establishing a series of California Coastal National Monument gateways. And those green stickers on that map up there are the initial 12 that we're looking at. Those are 5, so you can 5 of the initial 12, that's what those are. And those 5 are showing up here in red. We're looking at, they just happen to coincide with, there's one in each of the BLM field offices. What a surprise. I need to get the BLM field offices engaged in this, so they realize that this is part of their responsibility. And whether I have funding for them or not, they've got some responsibility in the budget that they have to do something on it. And so I've got them working on it. The most active one right now that's already moving ahead on that is our office in Arcata. Here in this part of the world, we really have been dealing with stuff on the other side of the mountains. And it wasn't until we acquired the property in Point Arena, the Stronetta Ranch property, that we're over here on the coast side. Well, what an ideal place to tie in with the California Coastal National Monument. The very first public meeting that I attended in Elk, we had a scoping meeting. The then executive director of the Point Arena Housekeepers, Inc. came up at the after the meeting and handed me an architectural rendering. It was a picture of a visitor center, and it said Point Arena Lighthouse and California Coastal National Monument Visitor Center. Those are the kind of partners I like. Somebody who would come to me and say, how would you like to do this? So we've kept that in mind. And the idea of, And that was before we acquired this Spinetta property or even knew we were going to do that. Well, when all that began to gel, it really made sense. You've got a unique part of the coast. You've got an opportunity to link the property that we're developing with what's going on in the lighthouse, with the city of Point Arena. And at the dedication for Spinetta property, I did talk to the mayor of the city of Point Arena, and we kind of informally talked about even the opportunity of initially using the, and this is just talk now, we haven't done anything to make it formal, but using their new library facility, the old storefront that they created there, and eventually planning to put a historic museum in there, to use that as our visitor contact for a Point Arena gateway. And as we develop capabilities out with the Spinetta property tying into the lighthouse, we can expand all that. We get that gateway moving there in that area. And that's where somebody can go from this part of the coast to get some information about the California Coastal National Monument. That could be different than what we may be doing if you go all the way down south. Down south, I'm working on Palos Verdes Peninsula Gateway. 4 communities down there, but one community has expressed interest to start with, and that's Rancho Palos Verdes. They have a visitor center, sits right out in Point Vicente, right next to the Coast Guard's Point Vicente Lighthouse. It looks like it's on the property, but their property runs right up in the Coast Guard property. And they're redoing their visitor center, and it'll be open in December 1st is what I think they're shooting for. And we'll be part of that. That will be our visitor contact point in the municipality's visitor center to get information about Palos Verdes and Southern California portion of the California Coastal National Monument, which is way different than if you're dealing with stuff up north. So if you jump further north, we're up in our Arcata office. BLM has a number of things we're already doing along the coast. We have the King Range National Conservation Area, over 30 miles of the most pristine part of the California coast, and that adjoins in the southern end state parks, our core managing partners, Sinkyun Wilderness State Park. So you've got that whole stretch of wilderness coast with rocks off of it. And we're in the process of acquiring the old Navy facility at Center Beach and getting rid of some of the structures there. And we acquired the ranch lands around that to become what's known as the Lost Coast Headlands. There'll be a recreational unit there. We've got the opportunity to use the monument to string all those together and to use our interpretive facility BLMs that we have at Shelter Cove as our gateway and get that started. But I also have been working on initially getting a gateway going in Trinidad, one of the areas where we have some really unique opportunities to do some things there. And then lastly on our list there would be getting up to Crescent City. But as you go in the middle part, we're doing a similar thing with our lighthouse. BLM actually manages a lighthouse down near Hearst Castle, Pecos Blancas Lighthouse. We've got 20 acres required from the Coast Guard, and there we actually maintain the light. We're the only federal agency that the Coast Guard has turned over the navigation responsibility to BLM. So down there, our manager of that facility is actually he's a lighthouse keeper. Officially, that's what part of his job is. But we have an opportunity to tie in there. But until we develop that property for public access, we'll be tying in with our partners, Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary and state parks at the Randolph-Hearst State Beach across from Hearst Castle. They're redoing a little building there and creating a 700 square foot nature center area, and we'll use that as our gateway for that part of the coast. And we're looking for a similar thing in the Monterey-Santa Cruz coast with a property that the federal government has just turned over to state parks, Pigeon Point Lighthouse. They're redoing the Foghorn building for interpretation with state parks in 2 of the sanctuaries and with the California Coastal National Monument, so that'll be our gateway for those partners. So those are the things we're starting with. All unique parts of the coast, all with some, just so happens the first 5 we're dealing with all the time, the lighthouses, some places don't. We are looking eventually of doing a gateway, probably tied in with Mendocino Headlands. And we're also looking at an opportunity dealing with the Elk area, where we're really simply dealing with our partner there with state parks, with Greenwood State Beach. It has a little parking area, has a trail that goes out around the cliffs, has a trail that goes down to the beach, and has the visitor center that now is only open 2 days a week. But even there's a mural the size of this wall, part of this wall, lower part, is a picture of the old pier that used to go out on these rocks. So there's one place we can talk about the historic uses of the rocks along the California coast. It's different than if we were doing that we're doing at the Lost Coast, or what we're doing at Palos Verdes. So it would be different flavor, but it would be the local folks would have an opportunity within broad frameworks, basically to figure out how they want to use the California Coastal National Monument. And if you put all these initial 12 together, that's where they're spread, the red and the green on there. So we really start getting rocks from Point Conception north. There are some interesting ones down south, but they're not very big. It's interesting that I find the larger the population, the smaller the rocks, the more interesting they are. You know, so you get up here where you've got big rocks, the bigger the rocks and the smaller the population, the more concerned they are about the feds being in their backyard. But that's nothing new. But we're looking at getting these going and having each of them have their own little local brand and identification and being run by local groups. So it would not be, so here's the framework we're operating in, but you've got the opportunity, folks, to make it what you want. And if we can get these first 6 going and then these other 6 and these 12 operating in the next few years, we could do some more in other places. But right now, this is more than enough to keep us occupied. So that's what we're dealing with the public side. To get the research side, of all the things we could be dealing, we're looking at where we can fill the gaps with seabird conservation, and particularly that we've been looking at the stuff in the northern part of the coast where we have gaps. And in fact, for the seabird community, they're saying from Point Arena north is the area where we can make the biggest splash, no pun intended, but we've got an opportunity to fill some gaps there that we'll be looking at. And then on the education side, a whole bunch of things we could be doing. There's a lot of stuff we will start, a lot of things we'll tie in with. I'm even looking at eventually some kind of touring route associated with the monument. I mean, for example, in this part of the world, from Bodega Bay all the way up past Rockport, you've got an opportunity for some really interesting things for an auto route associated with the monument. We'll be working on that in the future, but I haven't identified that as a priority yet because the kind of things we're working with. But the simple thing that we could be dealing with beyond a variety of other things is tide pools. And it's really a tide pool connection. It's not that we would be doing a lot of this. It's the fact that almost every place there is a significant tide pool in California, there are rocks that are part of the California National Monument associated with it. Like the tide pools that you have here, the portions of the rocks offshore above mean high tide are part of the California Coastal National Monument. La Jolla Cove has rocks, a portion above mean high tide, that are in federal ownership. King Range, obviously all in federal ownership. Off of the great tide pools that Steinbeck talks about in Monterey, all the big rocks off of those are all part of the California Coastal National Monument. So we're connected with all these. And what I was looking for is an opportunity of being able to use this larger corridor as a vehicle to coordinate things with a whole bunch of our other entities. And so I'm looking for something that we can demonstrate that. And the tide pool connection is that. And what's the number one thing I want to deal with that? And it's a very simple thing. It already exists. It's an opportunity to pull it together with a whole bunch of partners doing it. And that's a simple thing with tide pool etiquette. We could have something that could be available right here, apply right here at Sea Ranch as well as La Jolla Cove. For Southern California, the Crystal Cove Conservancy down at Crystal Cove State Park that our partner State Park has, have put together a neat little brochure. In fact, I think I've got it right here. They put together a very simple thing that, see that includes very much. They have it in here. That's not it. But there's an opportunity to take those things. That right now, a little bit of tweaking would apply to all of Southern California. With even a little more tweaking, you could get this to apply to all of California. It's a simple little laminated brochure. It's like this. It has some things on it to just follow good tide pool rules. Basically, tide pool etiquette. Something like this that we could make available. Probably get a grant to have somebody print it for us and have our partners listed on it and be available anywhere. It'd be applicable here as well as Crescent City or San Diego. So we're looking at something we do here. There's a whole bunch of people that have done this, that have it together, and we could use the monument as the catalyst to get those people together, to talk about it, and get something started. We wouldn't be bringing the expertise. We wouldn't be bringing. All we'd be doing was using this as the vehicle to get it going. And so I'd like to have a model of how we can do that with a number of things. This is a very simple one that we'd start with. So if you look at what we're really trying to do, is how we can use that whole corridor. is to do, does that look familiar, Julie? Where we could button down or button up the coat. That's Julie's quote one time.
I didn't do that, I did.
Well, I did, but you put it in there. I didn't put it in the paper, you put it in the paper, but so I'll give you credit for it.
You put it in a handout.
I did, yes, but I think it's the appropriate thing. We're really looking at how we can use it to help connect things, and it's sort of the last, I won't say, we have all things been going on the coast, we sort of bring the last little things. We bring the rocks that can help connect things together, and I think that's what we'd like to go do with the monument. So it's not something that is necessarily something that's going to be another layer of bureaucracy, but something to enhance the things that already exist and connect some of the things that are important to connect together. Quick summary. I eventually would like, this is the logo for the California Coastal National Line, and I'd like to eventually get, for all of our gateways, a logo something like this, so they have their own brand. It would be, those that are familiar with the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, which they commonly refer to themselves as Golden Gate National Parks, that whether you're dealing with Alcatraz or Christie Field or Presidio, all of them have their own little brand, and eventually we like Point Arena, Lost Coast, Palos Verdes Peninsula all have a brand to be associated with the California Coastal National Monument. But I thought it would be interesting here to kind of summarize what I was just talking about by looking at this particular logo. And what's interesting is that the artist who put this together didn't really quite think this way, but I've looked at it for a number of years now. I think it's interesting. Right in the center you have three rocks of varying sizes. And symbolically, they kind of stop right there at mean high tide. It symbolizes what it is we're managing in the California Coastal National Monument. Rocks, of course, above mean high tide. But it's not just those. They're in the broader landscape, or the seascape, of which they're an important part. If you look at it, you've got a couple stylized seabirds flying above it, which is a reminder that these provide important habitat for seabirds and pinnipeds and a whole variety of intertidal species. You look over to the right, you've got three aligned mountain ranges that are coming down to the coast. They're symbolic of the three core managing partners, land management agencies, Bureau of Land Management, state parks, and California Department of Fish and Game. And then the bottom, lastly here, a series of stylized waves that are symbolic of the various partners, both stewards and collaborative partners we have to really make all this work and connect it. It's what connects in this logo the land and the sea. And I think a really important thing that we're looking at doing. So it's kind of nice to have an opportunity to begin sort of talking about this. I always use it at the beginning and I always use it at the end, but I never talk about it. So here's the first opportunity I had to kind of look at that and see that some of the symbolism we're trying to do with the monument is actually identified in its logo itself. So I think that has some interesting advantages. And what is all this? Is really looking at the partnership in protecting unique California coastal resources. Well, that's my hour.
We take about a 10-minute break and then come back and find out more about what we're supposed to be doing about this. Can we get back when the big hand is on the tube?
Yeah.
Before we get started with the question and answer period, I do want to thank Marge Anthony because she's the one that actually called me and suggested that I get in touch with Rick, and I did do that. And I also want to say that I called Rick. The first time I called him, it was like at 4:30 on a Friday afternoon before, maybe 4th of July, before some weekend. And he was sitting at his desk and answered his phone, so I was really impressed. And every time I called him, he's been there. Thank you. Okay, I'll just let you choose. If you could please, is this microphone?
It should be live.
If you could address your questions to the microphone over here, so those of us who are halfway deaf can hear you.
And while we're doing it,
I'll talk real loud.
before you do, let me also mention, I do have in the front, I forgot to mention, we were talking about stewardship. I do have a blue sheet that has a 2-page thing on stewardship. There may be enough to go around. And then another general one, it's an old briefing paper we did on the monument, but it's got most of the things I talked about. Not to say all of them, but it's got most of them on.
Just a real quick question. What are these numbers here, 1 through 35 or so, all the way down to San Diego?
What I did to be able to talk about portions of the coast and the monument, what I did was break it into 36 sub-units, which I thought was as generic as I could get. They're not management units, they're not planning units, but we can use them for management and planning. It's just so I can begin talking to various people, and I was originally doing that so I could talk to the 5 field managers about what they had. For example, the manager that manages this portion of the coast has some of the more unique portions of it. He's got probably the biggest clusters of the monument along here. But there's a difference between what is here off the Sonoma Coast State Beach versus here on Sea Ranch versus Point Arena. So what I did was break those down into segments. There's one solely for Sea Ranch, and I don't know if I have to look at it and see if it extends beyond like the 12-mile boundary, but I was trying to use a break where there was a break in clusters. But it was also designed, there's 6 of them there, where there's absolutely no portion of the California Coastal National. There's no part of that segment that has any rocks in it. So I wanted to show people that you know, if I'm dealing with Ventura County, there's not much in Ventura County. There's some, but not much. Off of the area north of Patrick's Point, there's a lot of rocks, but almost all of those are in the National Park Service jurisdiction until you get south of Crescent City. So I wanted to be able to show those kind of things, so I put those together. I also took a step further for the managers, and if you're really interested in that, I think I've got a copy of that. I did some initial rating on all those. I figured there are people out there that know way more than I will ever know about some of these portions of the coast. But there are very few people who have looked at all the rocks that they could along the entire coast, and to at least give you a general rating of a high, medium, or low of their value related to their physical value, density, structure, geology, the physical aspects, biological, whether you have seabird colonies or pinniped rookeries or important for haul-out areas, or cultural, whether they have archaeological, historical resources on it, whether they add to the visual quality of the scenic drive on the coast, whether we have infrastructure there for interpretation, as I mentioned, like Sonoma Beach. So I rated all those, and then add those up, and each of them have a rating. The highest rating that I have in the entire coast is a segment off of Trinidad, for example. Lowest rating, obviously, are places where we don't have much, like off of Eureka, off of Humboldt Bay, between Center City and south of Arcata, or Arcata area. There's not much there. That's probably more than what you want to know.
No, thank you.
A statement first and then a question, Rosemary Knocker. I think it's a genius move to have so many partnerships in one way or another to get so many more people to have buy-in to this whole project. I mean, just one person, it's easy to shoot them down. When you have thousands who care about it, it's pretty hard to shoot down. And I just think that's a terrific move to have that much buy-in. The question, though, I have is, what do you see as the challenges to this? Can the feds give and then the feds take away? Is there wiggle room so that it isn't just quite as protected as we would like to think that it is? What are some major challenges that you can see facing?
Well, that's a broad question, but let me deal with some general things related to it. We've had the responsibility for managing those and protecting them, and really haven't done much with them. In one sense, they really don't have to. They do a pretty good job protecting themselves. But you've got a strong interest, and you've had developing since the Coastal Zone Management Act was passed a little over 30 years ago, putting more attention on the California coast. And I always say this is sort of the last little piece of it. And they created it as a national monument. And by the way, before it was a national monument, back in the mid-'80s, it was designated by the Bureau of Land Management, not by Congress, not by the Secretary, but by the Director of the Bureau of Land Management. The California islands, wildlife sanctuary. I don't think anybody, more than that, I think probably more than a dozen people that maybe even knew that. So nothing really happened. We did have an agreement with Cal Fish and Game to do something with that, but they got busy doing other things. With the designation of the California Coastal National Monument, you can't ignore them. You've got to do something. The U.S. Congressman out of Monterey who pushed that, again, this is not done by Congress, it was done by presidential proclamation. But he had proposed through Congress to put all those rocks in the National Wilderness Preservation System. And he couldn't get that moving anywhere in Congress. He couldn't get anybody to pay attention to that. When the Bureau of Land Management was taking some of these areas that we had proposed as national conservation areas in the West, that some of the congressional delegations didn't want to do anything with for political purposes, and prompted the Clinton administration to use the Antiquity Act to create them as monuments. The then state director for the Bureau of Land Management in California at that time said to Congressman Farr, why don't you push these to become a monument, a national monument? And what he realized was that by making them a national monument, it helped create some attention for things that he's been very interested in doing for a long time, and providing some formal protection for the California coast. Remember, this only deals with 20,000 rocks, a portion above mean high tide, but the intent was to help provide something to protect the coast. And the reason I wanted to get to this point is that it's created a monument. Since 1906, when presidents have had the authority to create national monuments, there has not been a single national monument that a future president has revoked. So once they've been a monument, they have not been revoked. This administration came in and was thinking of doing that. They found out real soon that most of those monuments had a lot of positive things behind them. And what I found interesting, most people don't know that, and within the first year, I started getting hearing questions from them, is where can we use the Antiquity Act? They haven't done it yet, but they were asking that in the first year of the Bush administration, because they saw the positive spin that it had. So, to me, you could create a monument, and my biggest problem before was getting awareness that it even existed. Most of you probably didn't know until relatively recently there was such thing as the California Coastal National Monument. It's been established since January 2000. We spent a lot of our time with our scoping and our planning to try to get the word out that it at least existed. And then I can start dealing with what it is and what it isn't. But we can do that, and it'd be very easy for the Bureau of Land Management and others just to kind of ignore that. It's there, we've got to protect it, we don't have to worry about it. But if we get a lot of local involvement in this, that's almost impossible to change that, to get rid of it. We really need to make it something. That's why I'm pushing the partnerships. That's absolutely necessary. But the gateways, which by the way will be a series of local community partnerships to make those work, and the stewards, those two things I think are really important to begin getting this grounded so we can start doing other things associated with it. But it's really up to a lot of us to define it. It's not just me, but I help provide the framework so that we can do this. It's really up to us to begin defining what it is and how we end up using it. Now, is there any other part of that you want me to? Okay, great. There was a question over here. All this.
My question is, what is the status going to be now for the offshore oil leases, oil well drilling leases that are out all over the place here?
Let me just first add, the California Coastal National Monument has nothing directly to do with that. Right? So we don't have any, it doesn't have any say one way or the other. It's clear in the executive order that created it. In fact, I've got a copy of that executive order statement here that says that nothing in this proclamation shall affect the rights or obligations of any state, federal oil and gas leasing in the territorial waters off the California coastline. Now, it said that. Again, because it's really the rocks above mean high tide. Those are already withdrawn from mineral activities. You couldn't put a claim for anything or an oil drill on top of those rocks. You can put it next to them, you can't put it on the rocks themselves. But now that the monument exists, anything that anybody does that might affect that has to be taken into account through the environmental processes, whether the state was doing it through CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. If they're doing an environmental impact report, they've got to consider the impact they have on the California Coastal National Monument and the federal government, the Mineral Management Services, if they're doing any leasing for oil and gas. They have to take into account whether that may have effect on the California Coastal National Monument. So the monument itself may not have any control over that, but they've got to consider that in what they're doing. But this whole thing can be used as a vehicle for any of us who want to use it to at least raise some questions. It doesn't prevent oil and gas leasing. It doesn't have anything directly to do with it. But because it exists, it can't be ignored if there's a potential effect.
Well, as probably most people know, there's a moratorium. The leases are out there. There's a moratorium right now, but these things can really change fast.
They can.
So I was wondering if there was more protection. Thank you.
This provides another vehicle we can raise and say, you at least have to consider it.
My name's Ken Holmes. I was wondering what activity was it that brought about the need to protect these? They're being sort of part of a national or a natural process of erosion. Was man doing something to disturb them to begin with, or how are you?
In this case, I could probably say to some degree yes, but in reality, no. This is part of the bigger concept of what can we do? This was some of the California coastal congressional folks. What is it we can do to provide some additional protection to the California coast? And the opportunity came along to put those rocks into the broad concept of national monument within the National Landscape Conservation System, and therefore recognizing that we have a unique landscape, seascape along the California coast that needs itself, we need to maintain it that way. We need to keep it as it is and not have things that could impact it. From my perspective, this is a very difficult thing to deal with, but it sounds simple, but most of what we deal with is reactive. Almost all of our national monuments, our national conservation areas were reaction to something, needing some protection. We've got one where we actually got an opportunity to begin doing something, getting something going before we start having a problem and prevent those problems. A simple little thing, and it may not seem like a big deal, but by the way, people ask me what's the biggest threat to it. It's just simply growing populations, and they're affecting everything. But with a growing population and growing interest in the coast and in activities, a healthier population, simple things like sea kayaking. What was going on with sea kayaking 15 years ago? Not a whole lot. A few hardy people were doing it. Now almost all of us can do it. And are doing it at places that people didn't think we would be doing it. Just think where things may be 5 years from now or 15 years from now, with extreme sports or other interests. So we've got a chance to actually get some folks paying attention to this before we have a problem. So this one, the real reason that I think the monument was created was simply the fact that California's coast is so unique, and we've got some folks that want to keep it that way. And the opportunity came along to take the rocks and add to that by making them the California Coastal National Monument. And so with that in mind, so I go back to the concept as part of something that it is an important part of the larger ecosystem. And that's what they were trying to protect. So recognition of trying to protect the larger coastal ecosystem, that we can use this to help raise those questions, be a forum to talk about those, to get the various agencies and entities that are interested in them together and talking. And not create another unnecessary layer of bureaucracy. We found out early on in our process that there are so many laws and regulations, both state and federal, that can be applied at it. We didn't need any new regulations. We just need attention to those that are already there. And this just gives us the vehicle to do this. This is the only federal designation that runs the entire length of the California coast, and therefore it's an opportunity to pull some things together that may be working well in parts of the coast and apply it to the entire coast. If we collectively, we who are working on this, think that, and that means the public as well, thinks that makes sense.
You might be interested, we had an issue in July of attempt to have fireworks displays on one of the regional parks.
A few of you out there called me about that.
And some of us used that designation of national monument as an argument against that activity, thinking that we were protecting the seabirds and aquatic life on one of the nearby islands of the park. So it was nice to have that designation to use that, and wound up we did not have the fireworks.
Well, that's good, and I think it's found out some of you who talked to me about that, is that for anybody who's doing fireworks over the ocean, on shore is one thing, over the ocean, they have to get a permit from the Coast Guard. Most people don't know that, so.
There's also the sound and noise of the fireworks.
Yes, but if it's over the ocean, the Coast Guard has to authorize that as well. But yeah, our biggest concern for those fireworks related to nesting seabirds, and particularly in July, it's a very critical time for it's when some of the seabirds are starting to come in. So,
just a quick question, maybe I missed it. Do you have dealings with the California Coastal Commission? Any common interest there? Or?
well, it's the first meeting that I had with Peter Douglas and his staff in San Francisco. Peter Douglas is the executive director of the California Coastal Commission. Talked to him about the monument and the fact that it's protection, and he was very interested in what we're doing. I talked to him about whether they'd be interested in being a formal collaborative partner in the future with us. We still might do that. And by the way, they pointed the person who works with me. I have a contact there that I go to all the time, and actually there's 3 people I deal with all the time, sort of bouncing things off. But as we left that meeting, he was over, he got in the hall, he walked at me and said, we don't need an MOU, memorandum of understanding. He said, you're a partner, consider us a partner, anything you need from us, let me know. So that was
well, you two are the only agencies that really cover the whole coast.
yeah, and that's what he says, that as long as you continue to push for protection, we're both moving in the same direction. So. And by the way, the Coastal Commission unanimously approved, the whole commission, our plan in a matter of minutes. They went up with a presentation like this. They said, we don't even need that, we approve it. And then the commissioner said, I'd like to see the pictures of the rocks. The chair said that, but they had other agenda items that moved on.
If the Sea Ranch were to sign an agreement with you to be a steward, exactly what is it that we would do? How would we interact, and what would you expect us to do?
Okay, to start with, what I'm looking for is a governmental entity, and this qualifies as that, or an entity that has ownership, and the association representing the property owners qualify for that. But it has an interest in the coast and the monument, and working with us as we begin to implement this. So now, what does that mean? Very simple thing. The first thing is I'd like basically to be the eyes and ears for them. What's going on out there? If somebody who's watching what's happening and becomes a local. But part of this is just evolving. We're at the beginning of all this. I don't know yet. To be perfectly honest about what I want to do with some of these stewards. I've got the model with the Air Force. They're just simply tying in with what they're already doing with the natural resource plan that they have. Tying it in with the Trinidad Rancheria, and collectively we've got some interesting ideas, but we haven't done any of that yet. What I'm really offering is how would you like to become in the beginning of this and help define the role of the stewards. Now we can define that as specifically or as generally as any one of our potential stewards would like it to do. That blue sheet of paper gives you a general frame. It doesn't provide a lot of stuff. It says you're basically helping us with being our sort of our local, watch how I use this term, but almost our local representative for this portion of the monument. We're really looking at wrapping in the stuff that you already have going on. You already are doing things related. What impressed me about Sea Ranch was the original thing I read about the word steward was there. The steward to protect the environment. And the whole idea of maintaining the naturalness, but also living there. I mean, how can we integrate the monument in with this? That's the concept I like with the monument for the whole coast. But what does that mean? I'd like to have a group of folks that serve very similar to some of your, if you want to use one of your existing committees or create another committee who is basically, for lack of a better term right now, the California Coast National Monument Steward Committee. That would be, as it's evolved, kind of working with us and defining what it is we're looking at doing. We are going to be doing seabird monitoring. We are going to be eventually doing some monitoring of habitat haul-out areas, seals, sea lion haul-out areas. We are going doing some probably intertidal monitoring in the future. But I have a bunch of partners that have the expertise to do all that, we'll be doing it with. But I need somebody locally, so we can start applying that, how would it work for this portion of the coast.
So I can just restate, you're looking for a thought partner with a lot of local autonomy that works together with you for the common goal of protecting the ocean landscape.
Sounds great. Yeah. Thank you. And somebody who's willing to evolve as we evolve with it. And realize that you have a say in it. You're not just, I'm not coming here telling you what it's going to be. I'll say, here's what I'd like to do. How's it work best here for the association and the community of Sea Ranch? A number of places we'll be working on attracting people. Do we want to do that here? No. I mean, one of the things here, you have to protect this coast. You don't have to attract a bunch of people. You got a bunch of people here, but you don't have to attract more people to this portion of the coast. Some places we will be doing that because that's what they want to do. Trinidad was very skeptical when we were talking about it for with Gateway. They said we don't want to impact our lifestyle. Well, I don't want to do anything to impact. The thing that makes Trinidad unique is what it is now, not becoming a tourist trap. So the question is, how can we get the folks and the various shareholders in Trinidad to work to define how that gateway will be. That may be entirely different than what we do at Palos Verdes. It may be different than what we're doing at Lost Coast, but they're doing it under a general framework. Same thing with stewards. It's very easy for me to deal with the Navy and the small, not that easy, but dealing with the Navy and the Air Force because they have people that are out in these places doing this all the time. And all we do is simply say, guess what, you've got that responsibility too. So they're doing it. We've got some unique opportunities here, and there's some things we can use from some models and some other places. So I'm really looking for folks that are willing to sort of join in with this ride. We're on a journey here, and I'm not sure where it's all going. I know where I'd like, and the idea is to be able to continue to protect the coast, but also allow people still to live, enjoy it, to benefit from it, but to provide some protection and enhancement that we may not have for the entire length of the coast right now. We've got an opportunity to use the monument as a vehicle to do that. But I'm just asking not to say you have to be worried about what we're doing anywhere else. You could be dealing with everything else could be falling apart. You could deal with the monument here. You wouldn't necessarily have to worry about what we're doing anywhere else. So hopefully it'll be working well everywhere else too. So. Yes.
You just answered my question. I was concerned about the gateways and the potential for attracting people. And you mentioned a coastal monument route up the coast and items like that, which would not be of particular interest, and it's a little hard for me to see how this protects those rocks if people are the problem. But on the Sea Ranch Historic, it's a natural. We do that. That's what we're doing right now. So it doesn't seem like much of a stretch here for us to tell you how to do it.
If anybody knows that implementing something, you always start in the easiest places first. So that's one reason I'm here. It seems like a neat fit. The interesting thing, you mentioned things like the vehicle route being attracting people. I'm looking at that as helping a way of educating folks, where you get some common messages about the importance of the coast and the sea and land connection and the fragileness of it, and why it's important, and why we've got an important landscape, why people come to the coast. People aren't aware of that. They come and do some pretty stupid things. So we've got an opportunity to at least help alleviate that to some degree. If we model an auto route along here, then obviously you've got some really logical places down in the state beaches and Sonoma State Beach. And as you come up the coast, there's some logical places at Fort Ross. And by here, how visible are most of these rocks? There aren't. I haven't seen them. This isn't mostly that. I'd be directing them right by here. And they'd be, where's the first part they may be? Would be a Wallet Regional Park. That might be the one spot. But that's the first one that you come to. That's joining the north end of Sea Ranch property. But that may be the closest one. But we can push them further along. We've got enough things along the whole coast here that we can deal with. I'm looking at attracting I was talking to John this morning, I was talking about the way BLM uses campgrounds and trails. In the past, we used them not to track people. We're not necessarily like the Park Service. There's a reason why the BLM is different from the Park Service. Park Service has what I always refer to as a schizophrenic mission. They've got the responsibility of managing the jewels of this country, but also to track visitors. They have, so that's an interesting thing to try to deal with. We don't have to do that. We can keep people away from places. We put campgrounds sometimes in the middle of our wildlands or near our wildlands, and keep them away from the places we don't want them to camp. We put trails that direct them around what we want. And that kind of concept is what we could use here. That's what we refer to. We are the dispersed recreation experts in the federal government. We deal with dispersed recreation all the time, and this is sort of an example of that. We can move them by here real quick. So, people, I'm talking about an automobile tour where you've got a majority of folks going, want to get out of their car. I want them to at least be aware that what they're looking at is a national monument. They may not even stop. They may be just driving. So that's a whole other set of folks. And what I'd like to be able to do, if this is what you're interested in, I can keep them directed right by here. Don't even have to put C-ramps on the map. Anyway, that's why I'd like to invite you sort of work with us as we evolve this, so that we, those folks that want more people, we can work with getting more people. Those that don't want things to change, we'll work on that as well. Yes.
With regard to national monuments in general, what constitutes a national monument? What criteria is used to name an area a national monument?
Under the Act, it simply says it has to be its objects of historic and scientific interest. And it says it should be the smallest reasonable size. Well, of course, here what it means, we're dealing with the rocks, the 1,000 acres, basically, that's the monument. It's not the whole 14,000. But some of the early monuments, one of them was a little place called Grand Canyon National Monument. Before Congress recognized it and made it a national park, it was the Grand Canyon National Monument. Death Valley was Death Valley National Monument. The Joshua Tree was Joshua Tree National Monument. And fairly recently, Congress recognized it and expanded it. They took BLM land next to them and expanded and made it national parks. So that's hard to answer. I did, when I was working with national conservation areas years ago with BLM, trying to get that defined, I took a look at what the National Park Service did, and I realized that there are over 18 different designations in the National Park System that we generally just call national parks. And their monuments are about as confusing as that. They range from small little areas to big chunks of stuff. So the law says that it is objects of historic or scientific interest. So the monument here falls into it because of the rocks. The rocks are objects of scientific interest. And it's all 20,000 of them plus, but it's only 1,000 acres. And again, I want to continue to reiterate that the monument is spread all along there. That larger area that is the corridor is not the monument, but that's the landscape that I operate in.
A follow-up question?
Yes.
What circumstances occur where a monument is changed to a national park?
A lot of times local interest enough to get Congress to do something. The national monument is done by presidential proclamation. National parks are created by Congress. Congress has to have legislation to do that. And the national conservation areas are created by Congress. So there has to be enough interest for Congress to be able to pass it.
I'm originally from Japan, and as you know, on the sun coast of Japan, ugly concrete thing is called tetrapods to prevent erosion and so on, and it's so ugly and it's really sad to see it. So in that sense, my former country is not very advanced. And I feel so fortunate to see the beautiful coast here. And then my question is, could you share with us, like maybe any other countries who are doing very advanced approach to prevent the
to protect the coastline.
And
Maybe Europe or wherever, I don't know.
it varies. The ones that I'm familiar with are Italy and France. And a lot of it's after the fact, and the impact has been there a lot of times. But they're in the process, and it's the one that I guess impressed me most is in the Cinque Terre in Italy, where you've got 5 old cities along the Mediterranean. That they created the Cinque Terre National Park. It is a combination of people living there and still using the land. There's a railroad that runs through it, there's highway, but they're still using the land, certain restrictions. They still do farming, olive growing, they still do fishing off of that. But you have, onshore is a national park with the communities as being part of that. They're integrated into that concept. And offshore is a marine protected area, like our national marine sanctuaries. They have all that combined into one entity. They're trying to manage it together. To me, that's a little more holistic approach to managing. The French along the Mediterranean have done some similar things, but similar to us, they've put a lot of their protection on the marine areas, which what we're doing here with the state, with the Marine Life Protection Act, those that are familiar with what's been going on the coast, trying to get our act together related to marine protected areas. But I think there's one thing we're missing, is that they're all part of a bigger system. We need to look at the whole system. You put pieces of it, you start to miss it. Well, the Italians are trying to do that. It appears successful, but I don't know. It's sort of coming in after the fact. It's like trying to do it in Japan right now, as opposed to 200 years ago. They would probably be an appropriate time to start doing something like that.
But to be fair with people in Japan, some parts they're doing a good job.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And the one thing that, the nice thing with the monument, the California Coastal National Monument, we're basically letting nature do its thing. If it's eroding away, it's eroding away. And that's at least those are the rocks. Now onshore is another thing. And I do know where we have national marine sanctuaries, like my partner with Monterey National Marine Sanctuary. One of their biggest issues these days is coastal armoring. So they're beginning to address that. And what they may come up with, not deal with, might be applicable in other places. But where we don't really have that with monument, we're basically letting the monument do its thing. It erodes away, it erodes away. But it's all doing it through natural processes. That is a little different in some cases where we have development along the coast. But that's a big problem all around the world. Any other questions? Yes?
Yeah, is California the only state in the U.S. that has that program now, or is it going to be up on the Pacific Coast like Oregon and Washington as well?
Well, California, with the Marine Life Protection Act, which is state law, is dealing with that. Many of the other coastal states have different marine protected areas and different approaches to it. There is an attempt, both at the federal level, to start looking at getting some consistency with marine protected areas for the entire coast of the United States. There's an executive order that maybe almost 10 years old now, directed the Department of Interior, to work with NOAA, our partners like the Marine Sanctuary. And that's what created the other partnership I have with the National Marine Protected Area Center. They're doing studies and all this. Now what's going to come with that, we don't know, because it keeps getting delayed because they don't have the funding to do a bigger study that they would really need. And I think it's better than moving slow because they've dumped a bunch of money into it without people having time to think about it. Who knows what would happen with all that. But the initiative is there anyway. And use California's example, where California, since the Coastal Zone Management Act, the federal law, a very unique law, gave coastal states the opportunity, if they could develop their own program, to develop a local entity that would be the state entity, that would be the representative for initiating that federal law. And the California Coastal Commission is that entity. That's California got their act together to do that. And then California passed a state law that allowed them to do it at the state level. So those are both federal and state statute that the state coastal commission is functioning under. And there's I cannot think of any other coastal state that has the setup we have here in California. I think a lot of it's the fact that, one, we have a large population. A large population lives along the coast, but we also have a very unique resource. And that's what I think all this has sort of come about. And it's interesting to come along with the California Coastal National Monument at a time where it's a really good opportunity to start coordinating things. So we can sort of bring something to the table. But it's evolving, and what California is doing, and some of the growing pains they're going through with things like the Marine Life Protection Act areas may be really hard to go through process, but in the long run, some fairly good things should come out of it. But other states aren't doing it aren't doing much of it. They're talking about it, but not doing much of it.
Off topic. On land, do you ever, are you ever called upon to ask about, to give advice about bluff erosion?
No. But there are some NOAA groups that do that, and the U.S. Geological Survey does that. The U.S. Geological Survey, which is another interior agency, does have their marine and coastal, I forgot the title of their program, but it's initiatives, and they're doing, they have some monitoring plots in various places on the coast. I don't know if they've come up this far, but they also have been dealing with beach erosion as well. And so they're the ones that provide some advice on the federal level. And the National Marine Sanctuary has been doing it to some degree, but the U.S. Geological Survey has been doing it from a scientific perspective. They've been monitoring those kind of things for a number of years. They'd be an interesting group to contact. And Menlo Park would be the place to start.
Do I understand, do I remember correctly that you said that originally the reason that it became a national monument to the Antiquities Act is because a California congressman specifically supported and proposed it, and that's why California has this, and Oregon and Washington don't?
Well, what Oregon has, it's interesting, is BLM in Oregon, over about a 20-year period, turned over the rocks that we had there to the Fish and Wildlife Service. And so in Oregon, their version of the California Coastal National Monument is the Oregon Coast National Wildlife Refuge. It's managed by the Fish and Wildlife Service. So we're looking at working with them on some things they've been doing with seabirds and seabird monitoring, so for some consistency. But yeah, and they're looking at expanding that up into Washington if they can. So if we do that, we'll have the whole coast covered under at least a federal designation for the rocks anyway. If there's no other questions, I will be here if anybody wants to talk.
Mary D has reminded me that I didn't ask for announcements at the beginning, and I see that she has one. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm just going to remind people that October 1st is the Earth Fair, and our posters up there with all Glenn's Mark did, it's beautiful. What you could say the theme is kind of stewardship, and we've got people coming from Fort Bragg all the way down to Bodega Bay and from Willits, and I just wrote letters to Mike Riley and David Colfax to get them here. The mayor from Point Arena is going to attend, somebody from GMAC, and we're getting representation from the Sea Ranch Association and linking up grassroots with governmental bodies. And I just asked Rick if he could get somebody from Ukiah BLM, and he said yes. So I hope to see you there.
Any more announcements?
What time? From 10 in the morning until 5:30
Where?
at the Walla Arts.
Well, it's 10 in the morning until 5:30. October 1st, right? Okay. I want to thank everybody for coming out, and I want to tell you that our next forum will be October 15th, and that will be Lynn Woolsey, our congresswoman. And she will be here, there will be a difference in time, I think, let me just double check it. I think it's 1:30. It will be from 1:30 till 3:30, but we'll be here in the same meeting hall. So hopefully we get a lot of people out for that. In November, on November 5th, we'll have the Commons Management Task Force will make a presentation. And in December, this is Dyden Wool Ken Holmes, can I say it? Are we confirmed? We're going to talk about weather. Weather on the North Coast. Yeah, now he's committed. And just one last thing, Walt has been videotaping the forum today, and I know a number of people, especially some of the board members, weren't able to be here and asked to have a DVD of the meeting. If anyone wants one for your organization or knows someone who wasn't able to be here that would like one, need a phone number. My phone number is 785-1777. It's easy to remember. Is that it? We could use some help putting the chairs away. Thank you.